Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language. This video is going to be having a look at the Edexcel English Language Paper 1, but that is version 2.0. I'll be using the June 2023 exam, and I'll pop a little link to that in the description of the video so that you can follow along. And this video is going to pick up from where I left off in the previous, so I'll be looking at questions 4 to 6, the information retrieval, and then looking at the 2 evaluation questions. There will be a video coming your way for the remaining couple of questions, and then of course paper 2, so do keep your eyes peeled. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so imagining that you've just done questions 1 to 3, and now you have just read the second text, which you should find attached at the bottom, and we're back to some good old-fashioned AO1, finding the information, implicit, explicit ideas. Okay, so from this one, we've got from lines 1 to 7, identify 2 points that the writer makes about football. So make sure that you use the exact line numbers, because if you use something from outside of what they give you, they won't give you the text. And as always, look carefully at the subject of the question. So in this case, what is he saying about football? And there's loads of things that you could draw attention to. You could say that it's popular, that it's faced prejudice, that it can be considered dangerous, that, you know, proportionally accidents are fewer in number. There's all sorts of things that you could say here. Now, in this case, I've just gone for it's very popular and it's considered to be dangerous by some. It is important that you recognise that actually, yeah, you can quote, but you can use your own words. It doesn't matter here as long as you're getting the gist of what is being told to you explicitly, because this is explicit information retrieval. And like I said, just draw attention to the line reference, just double check that you're getting the right bit. So those are your first 2 marks, done, golden. For B, technically the same skill, okay, because it's still information retrieval, but you might find 4B ever so slightly harder, and I shall explain why. So we've got from the extract, identify 2 reasons why people might take part in sport. So we're looking for the why, okay? Now, if you look at the extract, the fact is that in every form of sports, accidents will happen, and the very element of risk is with many incentive to the sport. Bathing accidents are frequent, yet who would say give up bathing? And hunting, skating, shooting, and even cricket all give their proportion of mishaps. Do you see how the information isn't leaping out on the page to you? And this is because they are looking for you to kind of think implicitly what is implied. That one's relatively straightforward. You know, risk is an incentive, so people might want to do it because it's risky. And then we've got phrases like, you know, the pluck, the nerve and physique of many a naturally timid boy. So essentially, if you take up exercise, if you take up this sport, you're going to have more pluck, so you're going to be more courageous. And nerve is the same sort of idea, and physique means that you're going to kind of build up your body, so it'll be good for your physical health. Another one is that the good far outbalances the negatives, and you know, really what we're thinking about here, like I said, it's implicit. Now personally, I think that using your own words is slightly easier to demonstrate that you've definitely understood. That doesn't mean you have to, like you can use words from the text and write around them. So I have just simply written to take risks. That's one reason, you know, so that's that little bit up here at the top. And then I've also said to overcome shyness and timidity, which is this bit here of many a naturally timid boy. So I'm saying, you know, timid and shy, it's a similar kind of idea. So it's overcoming that. But you could have had to build confidence, to make you more courageous. Any of those would do. But you'll notice slightly harder than 4A because it is implicit. Okay, question 5. More evaluation. So I talked in quite a bit of detail about evaluation in the previous video on questions 1 to 3. I'll just kind of recap some of the headline ideas here. But before we do that, I want you to always have in mind Who is the reader? Because our question is, in the extract, the writer tries to persuade readers that rugby and soccer are beneficial sports to play. Evaluate how successfully this is achieved. So you've got to put yourself into the mindset of the 19th century reader, because that's who the writer is trying to persuade here. So it's no good thinking to yourself, well, I don't think that's very persuasive, because you're not the reader. You might be reading the extract now in the exam, but it wasn't intended for you. So always have that in mind. Like, how would a 19th century reader respond to this? So we're thinking about persuading, we're looking at the reasons that it's beneficial, we are of course evaluating, and we are giving 3 reasons for our opinion. And that's really nice because you know exactly how much to write. It's lovely when they just tell you. So let's find some of the information that might be useful to us. So throwing off the more dangerous elements and becoming more scientific in their manner of playing, that's quite persuasive, because obviously it's offering like reassurance. The idea of it having a large influence on the national character, that's really important as well, because 19th century, they're very, very patriotic, and so this idea of it being something that is celebrated within the country would be quite persuasive. Likewise, the idea of it being practical and logical, there was a real kind of shift towards the sciences in the 19th century, so yeah, that's useful as well. It's a very manly sport. Again, remember, it's going to be more of a male audience, okay? Women would not have necessarily been playing football back then. No, there was a lot of women's football in the early 20th century when it was very popular, but this is pre that time. That it has a great and increasing place, okay, so that's very, very kind of positive. It's something that is for the hale and the strong. Hale means healthy here. And his kind of ideas about being an enthusiast himself, although that might make us wonder about kind of bias or anything like that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be thinking about our evaluation, and we are going to anchor everything in the text, yeah? The examiner's report actually made a comment about some people on this series just writing their own kinds of ideas about why rugby and soccer are beneficial to play. Like, everything that you're doing has to come from the text. You're evaluating the text itself, so don't use your own views in this question. Okay, quick reminder about evaluation. Okay, so I've given you the definition up at the top. You're making a judgment about a text, about its successes and about its weaknesses. You're going to signal to your examiner that you're evaluating by using PECs, by using our evaluative adjectives and adverbs. And if you want to think about your paragraph structure like this, it's a bit of a variation of a PEA, to be honest, but I say it this way so that you keep those evaluative adjectives and adverbs in mind. So you start with a topic sentence that is a judgment, so it has to include the adjective or the evaluative, or the adverb, sorry, my brain, from here. Then you're going to use your quote or quotes that back your point, but don't go crazy. Do you know what I mean? If you're using multiple quotes, keep them short and embed them into a sentence. And then, importantly, explain and justify that evaluation. So why is it successful, or why is it unsuccessful, right? That bit has to be done. So that's what I call a judge paragraph, just to make sure that you're hitting those judgments. Okie cokes, now for a model. Excuse me reading, you can always just mute me and read it yourself. So here we go. The writer effectively persuades the reader that sports are beneficial by suggesting they are becoming safer. He describes how they are throwing off their more dangerous elements and becoming more scientific. This is effective as it reassures that any previous dangers are actively being diminished. The comparative adjective more scientific would be particularly persuasive as the 19th century audience was becoming more focused on reason and logic. The games therefore sound safer and less influenced by chance and accident. So see what I've done there? I've made the judgment, I've popped in the quote, and then I've justified why it's effective. Judge paragraph. And I go on. He is also successful in his attempts to persuade as he appeals to attitudes about masculinity. He asserts that football is a manly sport, an opinion that he can only repeat. This emphasis would be effective to the 19th century audience, as it is a time when only men were playing football and ideas about strength and competition were important. Although it may feel unsuccessful, as it perhaps deters women from playing, it is unlikely that they would have the opportunity back then, and therefore the readership would be largely male. And then finally, he is successful when he outlines the physical benefits of playing the sport. He describes it as a sport for the hale and the strong of the coming generation. This is a powerful method of persuasion, as he implies through the nouns hale and strong that those who play are physically fit and healthy, complementing those who do play and enticing those who don't. Judgment, evidence, justification of that judgment. That is what you need to do all the way through for your evaluation questions. Now you'll notice all three of those were successful. That's fine. You don't have to say, oh, I better do 2 successfuls, 1 unsuccessful. As long as your judgments are valid, you can get the marks. Okay, and now we've got another evaluation. Gosh, this exam board does like evaluation, doesn't it? But in this case, we're doing whole text. So, whole of text 2. In my view, this text shows that rugby and soccer are safe games to play. Based on your evaluation, how far do you agree? So notice it says that the text shows. So you're evaluating whether or not the text shows that rugby and soccer are safe games to play. So you're thinking about what the writer's view is and evaluating how well he puts that across. It is not about you talking about how safe rugby and soccer is from your own opinion. It has got to be from the text. So it's very similar again in terms of evaluation, just as we've been talking about, but you want to do a couple of things. You want to offer a clear judgment, like an overarching umbrella statement that basically gives an assertion on how far you agree with this opinion. Most of the time, you mostly agree, you partially agree, but then you need to explain why. Like I said, root your judgments on evidence from the text. Don't be just chatting away about what you think about sports, but get into the debate. So when you look at a viewpoint that has been put out there by the writer, you need to evaluate how valid it is. Like, are there strengths to the argument? Are there weaknesses to it? Is there a kind of like a positive or a negative? So like, don't be afraid to say this could be seen positively and, you know, that sport is safe. However, you could also read it this way, and that somewhat undermines the ideas. Debate. Okay, so I've just popped various bits of the text in the next couple of slides. I'm just underlining a few, just kind of to talk through what I would kind of comment on. So I would perhaps like to think about the way that he minimizes the dangers. So he starts off by simply saying that people think it's a somewhat dangerous pastime. So the adverb somewhat already kind of minimizes it. And he sort of suggests that there's a lot of prejudice about it, which sort of suggests that the idea of it being considered dangerous is unfair if it's prejudice. And then he goes on to sort of explain that by looking statistically at the number of people actually being hurt. Then when he starts talking about fatal accidents, which you might argue is like, well, no, if there have been fatal accidents, clearly it's not safe. So you could say he's unsuccessful there. But you could also think about the way that he is, again, minimizing it by using so-called as an adverb, as if to say, were they really? And he says that they are sensationally reported, which again suggests over-exaggeration, and that really it's got nothing to do with football. So he's saying this, he's using counter-argument. He's saying, like, here is what some people are saying, but it's not true. And then he makes a comparison to other sports and basically says, come on a minute, you know, there have been accidents here, but you wouldn't stop bathing here means swimming, but like leisure swimming, if you go bathing, you're leisure swimming. And so he's basically making a kind of witty comparison, which he extends in that rhetorical question. We get a little bit of history about the fact that Edward III forbade the game by law, but he's very, very clear to point out that it's not because of safety, it's because they needed more time for archery. And then it makes reference to the rugby union game and the Football Association, suggesting that the game is now regulated. Again, the bit that we talked about earlier on about throwing off the more dangerous elements and becoming more scientific. So that is, again, reassuring. But then I've also highlighted this bit right at the end about him saying that he's an enthusiast, because that might actually make you think to yourself, he's a bit biased. Can he really actually be objective? Is he trying to put it in this light because he wants everyone to love the game that he loves? And finally, we have got a model response, slightly longer, so sorry about my boring reading voice. So let's have a look. I mostly agree with the view that the text shows that rugby and football are safe games to play. However, at times the writer's bias towards the sport perhaps undermines his intention. There's my umbrella statement. Firstly, the text successfully challenges any negative views of the sport being considered a somewhat dangerous pastime, the adverb somewhat already minimising the issue. He does this by suggesting that this is a prejudice, immediately suggesting that this depiction is unfair. Oh, sorry, double suggesting. Triple suggesting. This is emphasised by suggesting any so-called fatal accidents are sensationally reported, also conveying that the dangers associated with football are grossly exaggerated and possibly due to other factors. However, he also acknowledges his own bias, revealing that he is an enthusiast, which might make readers question whether his view can be trusted, causing them to question the overall safety of the sports. I do apologise for the triple suggesting. You might have recognised that I'm trying to do this very quickly before the exam on Friday. Sorry about that. Yeah, swap some of them out. Conveying, demonstrating, presenting, not three suggestings. But aside from that, note the way that I have embedded my quotes, so I've been able to use quite a few, and I've kind of gone, right, this is what he's up to, this is why it's persuasive, but hang on a minute, can we trust him? So I'm engaging in the debate. Hopefully the second paragraph will be a bit better in terms of the suggesting. Having undermined the danger of the sport, the writer then proceeds to concede that there is an element of risk, which is perhaps slightly less successful, that's my judgment, as it somewhat contradicts his earlier argument. However, he is successful in reminding the reader of the benefits and how they outweigh any small dangers, using a comparison to bathing accidents, reminding the reader they would not give up bathing. This use of humour in his rhetorical question is very effective in suggesting safety, as it compares the sports to a more harmless pastime of leisure swimming. And then finally, the writer effectively describes the way that sport has developed through time, referring back to times when the sport was banned, not for safety issues, but in favour of archery. He then mentions the two great governing classes of football, the rugby union game and the Football Association. This is particularly successful as it reminds the reader that not only are there rules, but both games are and will continue to be regulated, making them seem safer. So coming back to the point. So I'm continuing to use my evaluative adjectives and adverbs, but I'm also engaging in a debate with that viewpoint and looking at little references that he's made and thinking, yeah, that is persuasive, but at the same time, think about it that way. Whew. Hopefully that was helpful. I've whizzed you through that one. I will endeavour to make a video on the second part of the paper on questions 7 and 8. Hopefully tomorrow, so that you can look at it before your exam on Friday. That is it from me. Thank you so much for watching and happy revising.